everyone. Seeing a presence of a quorum, I'm going to call this meeting of the Amherst School Committee Public Forum to order. It is now 6:02 p.m. I just want to make sure that Amherst Media, are you ready? There's that knock. Okay, as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and live broadcast by Amherst Media. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. This forum is mandated by the Amherst Town Charter, Section 4.2, as follows. Public forum. The chair of the school committee shall call at least one public forum a year to address items relevant to the public schools. The public forum shall present the public with context, alert the public to upcoming issues, and collect feedback from the public. So that's what we're here tonight for. I would like to acknowledge Town Manager Paul Bockelman, who is here with us tonight, and also Town Council President Lynn Griesmer, who is also here. Thanks to both of you for attending. And this meeting is an opportunity for the school committee and the superintendent to hear from you, the community, on matters of importance to our elementary schools and our community. I also see another town councilor here. I'm sorry, or several, actually. I just glanced up and saw everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. So this is an opportunity for the school committee and superintendent to hear from you, the community, on matters of importance to our elementary schools and our community. We held 6 public listening sessions earlier this year that we initially thought would meet the requirements of the charter, but added this one today to offer an additional opportunity before the year's end for the public to raise questions, make comments, and further engage the superintendent, committee, and district on topics that matter to you. The format for tonight's forum will be as follows. The superintendent will make a presentation about a few items currently being considered by the Amherst School Committee and the district. Primarily, these items refer to capital needs, but also include other upcoming projects. Upon the conclusion of his presentation, members of the community who wish to speak will be invited to do so. The stated time on the agenda for this forum is 20 minutes. However, we will continue this forum for as long as we need to ensure that we hear from all of those who wish to speak and that the topics raised here are recorded and answered to the degree possible. Comments can be feedback, but can also be in the form of questions. In the interest of time, and because this committee does have a posted meeting that begins after the forum, if I think that a matter raised by a community member tonight will take more time than is reasonable, I will ask that the superintendent or this committee follow up with that person individually and separately, or that the matter be a topic for discussion on a future Amherst School Committee meeting agenda. On that note, because this is a public forum of the Amherst School Committee, we're only hearing tonight matters related to our Amherst elementary schools. Community members were welcome to address any issues of concern related to our elementary schools. If matters outside of our jurisdiction are raised during this forum, they will be referred to the appropriate body and may not be directly answered by the superintendent or school committee tonight. And with that, I turn the meeting over to Dr. Morris.
Sure. So there's packets in the back of the room, and I'm going to briefly go through the slide deck that's there, because again, I say briefly because tonight's meeting is much more about listening and hearing from the community than it is about hearing me speak, but hopefully it provides a bit of context for the community. So as the chair said, tonight's presentation is mostly on facilities, although the last slide does include some other initiatives going on in the elementary schools. And so the overview for the facilities piece is current infrastructure, concerns and responses, potential future capital projects, and MSBA process and timeline. Sorry, different setup for me than usual. So first area of concern on facilities is around safety. So last year, this body, as well as other bodies, commissioned an ADA report looking at accessibility and found many areas of concern. Staff for many years have had expressed concerns about air quality. There's a concern about the entrance of the school, about 90 to 100 feet between the front office and the entry, which you would never build a school that way today. Neither Wildwood nor Fort River have fire sprinkler systems that would be required by today's current code. There's a lack of there has been a lack of modern internal door locks, and there are many external door issues that are original to the building and hard to open. And in the case of emergency, that's a major issue. In terms of responses, we have multiple ADA projects. For example, one that's completed is looking at accessibility to interior learning and recreational spaces at Crocker Farm and at Wildwood, particularly as interior courtyards. That's been done. That's an ongoing process to address the many areas that were identified in that study. We performed air quality testing. We have planned to remove carpeting at Wildwood over time, more routine checks of exhaust fans, custodial checklists, and we rented large dehumidifiers to test them out this summer and proved to be successful at reducing some of the humidity at the schools in the hot summer months. At Wildwood and Fort River, we are in the process of reducing decorations and posters in classrooms. Non-sprinklered buildings can only have 20% of the classrooms have paper on walls, whereas sprinklered buildings can have 50%. So we're working with the fire department and staff to address that need. 20% is pretty low for what you would think of as an elementary school classroom, but that is the fire code, and we're working with the fire department on that. Over the last couple years, we replaced all the locks so that they lock from the inside, which is something that historically the locks did not do, and the exterior doors are being replaced in order of need. So we're well on our way in that regard. In terms of building systems, some of the concerns have been the HVAC systems, the roof and moisture issues, particularly at Fort River, outdated electrical systems at Fort River and Wildwood, and the challenge of maintaining older buildings that things break down on a pretty routine basis. And so in the last few years, we replaced the oil boiler at Wildwood, replaced the compressor at the Wildwood chiller. We are in the process of replacing leaking skylights at Crocker Farm. This year, we rented a portable chiller as a backup if the cooling system failed. We have patched the Fort River roof. We're doing an audit for the electrical system at both Wildwood and Fort River this year. And we've added, conservatively $880,000, probably a shade more than that if you include all the indirect costs, to the operating budget because we need more custodians and maintenance staff to deal with Fort River and Wildwood than they would typically. So they both have more custodial staff than Crocker Farm, even though right now Crocker Farm has more students pre-K to 6 than the other two buildings have. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really bad with the slides. So last area of concern to talk about is learning concerns. So it's been discussed frequently in the community the last few years. There's lack of full wall, many years I should say, lack of full acoustic privacy at Wildwood and Crocker Farm. It allows a lot of ambient noise and non-ambient noise to go back and forth between the classrooms, which is a distraction to both students and adults. Lack of windows and natural light in many classrooms at Wildwood and Fort River. Many of our small group spaces for ELL students, students with special needs, are the most likely to be without natural light based on how the building was designed. And our specialized special ed programs are not integrated into the rest of the classroom spaces because we did find classrooms that do have walls, and based on the special needs of those students, they do need to be there, but in a typical building design, what you would have is they'd be integrated into the flow of the rest of the building. Unfortunately, these are not things that can be addressed or ameliorated without a major either construction or renovation process, and hence we applied to the MSBA core program in April, and we'll hear next month. Quick summary of capital projects, things to be considered that are on our 10-year capital plan. Replacing the exterior doors at Wildwood and Fort River I talked about, that's a gradual process. Replacing skylights at Crocker Farm, the same. We have planned to repair and potentially replace unit ventilators at all schools. That's where the heating and cooling comes through. So based on the efficiency of that unit, it's going to have a large impact on how those systems work. Continue making accessibility repairs at all the schools. HVAC equipment replacement. So upstairs at Crocker Farm is quite hot because the cooling equipment there, it's been 20 years or almost 20 years, and one of the systems is not working on all cylinders, and we'll need to address that. Parking lot repaving has been one of these things. Parking lot in general, repaving gets pushed off in every district that we have on, but it will need to be addressed, and the roof is something that also needs to be addressed. And even in the best case scenario with MSBA, the chair and I heard from MSBA on their site visit that they had some questions about the viability of that roof, even making it 5-6 years. So that's something that we'll have to continue to look at. MSBA timeline and schedule. So the application to the MSBA went in on April 10th, 2019. The site visit to Fort River and Wildwood was on October 16th. The MSBA board vote is on December 11th. And a little different than the last time, what they explained to us at the site visit, a little different than the last time we were in, is they stagger the entry points for communities in a different way than they did historically. So April 1st is the first staggering of districts who get invited in December to fully enter the process. It doesn't happen immediately, in other words. Then there's a May date and a June date, And so that's something that's worked out in the interim period between communities and the MSBA, but it gives a couple months for communities to get organized prior to the official entry date into the core program. And my final slide is about just other initiatives in the elementary schools. The first, implementation of a new math curriculum in 6th grade. You've heard about more of this at the regional level. More grade levels were affected, but we had a change last year, and we'll be coming back. And actually, the Amherst School Committee had a joint meeting, where they heard quite a bit about that recently. We've had a successful launch of our Caminantes dual language program at Fort River, both in terms of the enrollment and hitting pretty close to what we wanted in terms of our Spanish-speaking population's percentage in the program, as well as the instructional piece. We get some assessment results based on a dual language assessment in the last few weeks that showed high growth for the students and a really strong start across the board. We are exploring options for expanding early childhood access in the town, and working with the town of Amherst as well as Head Start and other folks in the community who have a passion in this, and we'll have a report at our next Amherst School Committee meeting on the results of that to look at different options to address underserved populations. Integration of social emotional well-being programming. We talked about that when I was doing my goals. And lastly, that there's a grade span advisory board who is currently working to provide an analysis of where sixth grade students might be educated, whether in the elementary schools or in the middle school. This is a follow-up to a facility study done last year, and I think in either January or certainly by early February, we should have a more complete study and report based on that. So I know brief, but trying to not talk as much and hear from the community. So I'll stop here.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Morris. So at this point, again, this is a public forum intended for the community members, actually, to address the school committee and the superintendent. But if there are any clarifying questions from the committee, I will allow them now before we get started. Okay. Great. All right, so any members of the public who would like to speak are invited to do so now. You will each have 3 minutes, and I'm going to stick to this policy because I want to make sure that everyone who wants to speak tonight can do so. We don't have a clipboard, but I will ask that if you wish to speak, you please come to the microphone and state your name clearly, because, again, this meeting is being recorded, and we're going to be writing down names just to make sure we can keep track of who's talking. And then, once again, we're going to try to answer questions as they come up, and if they are relevant to the Amherst School Committee's jurisdiction. Otherwise, they will be referred to the appropriate body or the superintendent, who can follow up individually. So again, very important that we hear your name, and if you would like, afterwards also, we can get your contact information in case your questions are not answered here. So with that, I invite whoever wants to come first. You can come up to the microphone, and there are 2 microphones, one person at a time, though, please. And just make sure that you press the button. It should be lighted so that you're being heard.
Hi, good evening. My name is Vera Tuangmani Cage. I am an Amherst resident. I have children in the school district, one a junior and one in the 8th grade. I also am a former parent of Crocker Farm, and I'd like to, inquire about the status of Crocker Farm as one of the lowest performing schools in the state, as needing targeted assistance intervention. So I'd love for our district leaders to respond to that and to share with the community some of the steps that are being addressed or implemented to change the prospect and the trajectory of our students. As you know, a lot of our students who matriculate to the middle school also have a hard time. So I'd like to make sure that we are monitoring their progress and achievement, and that they are adequately prepared for middle school. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Morris, do you want to address that?
Sure,
question?
briefly. So I appreciate the question and the concern. Thank you for coming and sharing that. So at Crocker Farm, many of our elementary schools, When we talk about MCAS performance, particularly, we have a number of students who opt out of the testing, and it does skew our data. And so I say that as a caveat, not to avoid talking about achievement, but I think it is worthwhile that when we look at subgroup categories, subgroups are very small, and they don't include all students. So in the past, we have gotten significant markings because we didn't have the high enough participation rate in all groups. As it relates to Crocker Farm in particular, Crocker Farm did find that their MCAS scores last year didn't align with their local assessments. I'll be candid to say that we trust our local assessments more than the MCAS, but we are responsible for responding to MCAS scores. And in doing so, they now have an articulated school improvement plan, which was shared with the state. The state expressed a lot of positive response to that school improvement plan, and is interested in helping support that plan as it relates to both improving academic, social-emotional, and community outreach, which were the three themes of Crocker Farm's plan. I think if there's any specific questions you have related to Crocker Farm, as Derek Shays, Principal Shays Communication sent out, please share any thoughts, ideas you have. They have a very collaborative model for creating their school improvement plans, as all I do, and any community feedback would be more than welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other community members who would like to speak at this time? Please come up to the microphone. We need you to come up to the microphone so that Amherst Media can record it and so that you can be heard.
This one?
Just make sure the light is on.
Right. So my name is Mary Lou Conca. I live in Shutesbury. I'm a member of the Equity Task Force as well as the Wellness Committee. I am a taxpayer into the bigger pot of the administration. And I have a question. What I just learned here, and what I know from the buildings themselves, that I find it a tinge confusing that that school budget money is not being used to fix the roof, the air quality, et cetera, the mold. I know that there is mold in the buildings. When, on the other hand, I hear that for lack of, okay, I guess I can't say vacation, trips are being made out of state, to Puerto Rico, for example. So why wasn't the money used to fix the immediate problems that we know, excuse me, plague our buildings? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Morris, would you want to answer that?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So our capital budget does include money to fix the roof, as well as to address the air quality issues at Wildwood. That comes through the capital budget, which is a separate budget than the operational budget, which covers for professional development experiences for staff.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the community? Please feel free to come up to the microphone. Please make sure the microphone is on and just state your name.
Hi, my name is Tony Cunningham. I'm the parent of 2 children at Wildwood Elementary School. And there's so much I'd like to discuss with you all in a public setting, but with a limit of 3 minutes, I'll focus on the possibility of Amherst 6th graders moving to the middle school. Earlier this year, I served on the Facility Use Advisory Board that looked at the middle and high school buildings. One outcome of that study was the finding that there is sufficient space in the middle school building for 160 more students without requiring major renovations or an addition. However, a number of suggested improvements to the building were outlined in the report by the architects, and I would like to encourage the school committee to consider including them in the regional schools capital plan. These priority improvements include a sprinkler system estimated at $1.6 million, a fire alarm estimated at almost $700,000, improved security at the entrance estimated at $2 million, and interior paint to brighten up the building at an estimated cost of over $1 million. Perhaps the painting could be an opportunity for community building with some volunteer labor from students and families. There are also a number of inner classrooms on the second floor of the middle school building that don't have windows. One suggestion from the architects was to install solar tubes to bring natural light into those classrooms, and that could be done when the roof is replaced. In addition, there's significant interest in adding rooftop solar. which leads me to a question. What is the plan for the middle school roof if we must wait another year or more until MSBA funds become available to help pay for it? Apart from the infrastructure, some of the other aspects of moving sixth graders to the middle school are academic and social emotional. I'm one of the parent volunteers in the group studying the move, the Grade Span Advisory Board, and one of the goals is to identify teaching and team models. With only one middle school teacher and few sixth grade teachers on the board, I have concerns about the board's ability to make progress on this front. I've encouraged Dr. Morris and Ms. MacDonald and the board to do outreach to the community to gauge the level of support for moving sixth grade and find out what people's concerns are. Unfortunately, there's been reluctance to do any outreach early in the process, and there has been reluctance to survey teacher support for the move. In my opinion, putting off engaging the community and teachers on an important potential grade reconfiguration is kicking the can down the road. And any delay in this is a delay in addressing our elementary school buildings. It's worth remembering that the cost of the next MSBA feasibility study is likely to be borne by the town, and any delays in figuring out what our options are will add to the cost to taxpayers. I would encourage you all to not be afraid to reach out to the broader community early and be willing to address concerns that will come up and change direction if necessary. In general, I would like to see a greater openness from the school committee to public dialogue with the community on this and other big issues. I imagine there are many people that want to be included in these conversations and that can bring important perspectives. I would encourage you to be proactive in creating opportunities for two-way discussion and decision-making. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to come up and speak? Please feel free to do so.
Hi, I'm Michael Burkhardt. I'm an Amherst resident. I'm curious about the fact that Crocker Farm has the designation as needing more intervention when the demographic data is listed by Department of Education Secondary Ed shows they have the same amount of disadvantaged students percentage-wise as Wildwood. And Fort River has even more. So I'm curious to hear your analysis of why it took place at Crocker Farm and what the plan is to remediate that.
Sorry, I think I missed the first sentence or two of what you said, so I apologize. Mr. Burkhardt, do you mind repeating that part?
Yeah. The issue that was mentioned by Vera earlier. So Crocker Farm's the only school that's designated in need of intervention, and yet its demographics don't really differ from Wildwood or for Fort River. In fact, Fort River has, what is it here? In terms of economically disadvantaged, Fort River's got 37%, while Crocker Farm and Wildwood have 29% each. So what's your analysis of why this is happening at Crocker Farm?
Dr. Morris?
So as I tried to say earlier, and perhaps I'll say it in a different way, that we don't build all of our instruction around MCAS. And our local assessments that we did in terms of reading and math don't align with the MCAS scores. So we're not seeing locally significant differences between the achievement of students regardless of which elementary school they went on, and when they go to. And so when we think about intervention or response last spring, each of the schools presented school improvement plans, which are designed exactly to do that, about what their response is going to be, not particular to MCAS scores, but to increasing the achievement of all students. And so certainly we could, and I think the plan would be to have the principals share how they're doing, what the progress is, and have the data that they're having locally to share back with the committee as well as the community this year.
Okay, I hear that. I still don't hear an analysis of why there's a difference in Crocker Farm as opposed to the other two schools. Even though I don't set a whole lot of stock by MCAS either, but it has ramifications politically and economically. What's your understanding of why it took place at Crocker Farm?
So one of the things that we found was it was the first year of MCAS testing all on computer, and some schools had varying levels of specific practice and attention that was given. We're talking about third grade students, so pretty young kids taking tests on a computer, and we did see some variance between the schools on that, and we've addressed that matter with the Crocker Farm staff to make sure that we don't want to go down the road where we become MCAS factories. I don't think anyone in the room would prefer that, but to make sure students have the adequate computer skills for how the MCAS protocol looks like on the computer, because we were not consistent across the board on that front.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the community?
As you know, I am Chrissy Ryan. I am a mother of 3 children, the youngest who recently graduated from Wildwood. I'm not here to address this school committee as I do not recognize your authority due to evidence of a lack of allocation of equal spending in the budget that has harmed marginalized students and families. And the subsequent response by the members of the committee when called to address these systemic issues to then inappropriately use the forum to deflect from these core issues of equal allocation of spending that I raised through the stated channels, as Mr. Nakajima has repeatedly stated, of public comments, emails, and one-to-one meetings that were requesting equal allocation of school finance, transparency, and writing about clear violations of students' and teachers' civil rights. These forums were used to deceive the public through the use of this forum to discredit the issues that I brought forth, and now I will state what some of them were. Before I do, my 3 children all attended Wildwood for their elementary school years, and as you recall, the issue of licensure came up to my attention as a single mother with full custody of 3 children due to the unlawful suspension of my son by an unlicensed administrator. After I cleaned up the mess that was for years and years exploiting the licensure process to bend favor towards preferred educators in certain neighborhoods, I began doing public records requests. Why? Not to harass and to bully, has been repeatedly misstated by this group, but because that is just what it's called. It's called transparency and accountability. It's what we ask of our teachers. It's what we ask of our administrators as parents. It's me, a parent, who's looking at this group and saying, where is your accountability? After months and months of watching this group minimize harm done to students who are at risk and chalking it up to a superintendent who was just learning, I decided to continue to investigate that this may be more symptomatic of a deeper issue. Through the public records requests, this is some of what I found. There's mixing up of the 2 budgets between the regional and the Amherst. An example is that there was a SPED survey done by the Pupil Services Director that amounted to almost $20,000. Records that I received on the raw data indicated that there was not an equal attempt to include all voices for elementary parents. This data was then used to create a narrative about special education, which is the highest, most massive amount of money that's in this district, an unsustainable model that is going to a very small number of people, and a lot of money that's only being spent by 1 or 2 people in the administration. Which gets me to number 2, the superintendent, the finance director, and the pupil services director are the only 3 people who are making any decisions about the budget. There isn't any transparency, and there's a complete lack of being able to engage in a conversation about it, which amounts to what is nothing more than a monopoly. Additionally, these are the same people who are in charge of the $33 million budget for the regional district. These central office employees are receiving salaries that stream from all 3 school budgets and also have no job descriptions on file, so it's difficult to assess where those job duties are actually the investment is being returned on.
Ms. Ryan, I'm sorry
Number
to interrupt
two,
you, but you've
there's
almost gone to 4 minutes, so
Okay.
please wrap it up.
There's $400,000 that was paid in adult sabbaticals for elementary teachers, mostly white men, who were obtaining second and third master's degrees, some who already had PhDs, getting educational opportunities, and then the next year they were cutting student costs. This committee approved those cuts, and they also approved those sabbaticals. And they also approved $2,000 for travel, and then did not notice that it was being reimbursed 3 times as much. There's over $100,000 in stipends for teachers, and yet we are having conversations about how to pay back food lunch bills. Teachers are reimbursing their food on trips. For instance, a trip to Puerto Rico that was simultaneously, at the same time, being submitted to the MSBA about a school that was being said to be torn down. They were
Ms. Ryan,
supposed
I'm going to have to cut you off now. Please, you've gone to 5
The
minutes.
Family Center spent $25,000 on a trip to San Diego,
Ms. Ryan, please.
a 4-day trip
This
to
is a
San
public
Diego.
forum. We have a certain policy that we have to adhere to. We've asked all of our
So
speakers.
I am wondering why there has been no discussion about a participatory school budget process with all voices heard. I also went to the town manager, who would not engage with me in this
Ms.
conversation.
Ryan, you are being
And I would
asked
like,
to please.
I would like all of you to answer the question
Ms.
going
Ryan.
forward as to why the people in the community are discredited, called mentally ill, crazy. What's the other one? Oh, I had an affair with the middle school principal. That was a new one. Because
Ms.
I am
Ryan,
asked, because I
excuse
was
me,
asking about the
You have
money.
run past your time, so we are going to ask you to please stop your comments now so that other people can take the microphone.
Mm-hmm. Data and spending does not lie, and it is clear that ARPS operates in this cover-up culture that spans from disparities in discipline.
I'm going to move to
To
recess
disparities
this
in
committee until
educational
we can
opportunities.
get the forum back.
And I would like, as Mike
I have a
Morris always
motion.
says, to end on that the budget is a value statement and that this spending and the money is not inaccurate.
I would like to move
Thank
to
you.
recess the committee.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for your service yesterday.
Hello, my name is Maritha Wallace. I'm a current resident of Pelham, and I've had 3 out of my 4 kids graduate from Amherst Regional High School, as I too have graduated from Amherst Regional High School and have worked in the Amherst public school system for 7 years. I give my 3 minutes to Ms. Ryan.
At the same time as the superintendent reimbursing a trip to Puerto Rico that was to recruit Latino educators to a bilingual school, a dual language school, the committee was also simultaneously submitting an MSBA a proposal to tear down this school. A sabbatical was approved for a teacher who's in San Diego at this moment, has his salary paid for, to become an administrator at Wildwood for a project-based learning school, while the MSBA proposal also stated that the Wildwood school was being torn down. The data, the qualitative data taken by a scientist from UMass stated that there was illnesses that the teachers were reporting and transfers for years. There was simple things like filters that were not changed. My kids spent 7 years at that school, and these teachers are reporting headaches and that there was mold, and they were concerned about asbestos. And the scientists wrote there were simple things like air ventilators that were not changed. At the same time, of thousands of dollars reimbursed in food for boys' sports, while girls' sports went unfunded. Well, mothers came here and were upset about the school, the field hockey fields, which was characterized by this group as an egregious emergency. Those are Title IX violations. Those are violations of girls' rights, and it's a violation. And I brought this up, and I repeatedly asked for accountability. I asked for equal allocation of spending in special ed. I asked for you to stop tracking students who are at risk into alt-sped programs based on false data. These are valid requests. I asked if I could meet with you to ask you why the registrar category in Munis has over $400,000 going to it, and that you are signing off on warrants every 2 weeks, that they're being paid into this count of over $10,000 for a position that is being paid for $60,000. Where is the extra money?
Ms. Ryan, you have reached your 3-minute limit.
So I would like you to answer these questions without me having to create a website to hold you accountable. So let's not victimize ourselves. We come to public comments. We write you emails. I educate you with my keynotes, with my infographics. That wasn't me being
Ms. Ryan, you have reached
disrespectful. That
your
was me trying to
3-minute
help
limit,
you.
Ms. Ryan. There are other
Okay.
people who wish to speak.
So the centralized authority where you shape the narrative for yourselves, it's not going to be sustainable for much longer, okay? Because the money is not going to lie, and that's why I submitted it all to the Attorney General. So I respectfully ask you, again, to stop disregarding the voices of the community and attempting to discredit single mothers with false allegations of bullying and harassment when I simply asked for equal allocation of the spending. And that goes for all of the people who sit quietly by and allow the other people to take the fall. You are all responsible, all of you, and you are not victims. If you are up here, you are accountable to us.
Thank you. Any other community members can come up, please? Does anyone else wish to speak? Okay, so we have reached our limit for the public forum for tonight. So this concludes the public forum of the Amherst School Committee. Thank you for your attendance tonight. I will be making a report to the Town Council on Monday, December 2nd about our elementary schools, and that meeting begins at 6:30, I believe. The regular meeting of the Amherst School Committee will begin in 5 minutes after a short recess. Can I have a motion to adjourn this public forum?
So moved.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you. This forum is adjourned. So I'd like to call a meeting of the Amherst School Committee to order at 6:46 p.m. And we just had a public forum. I understand some folks may stick around. Hopefully they will. But we're going to wait until our audience members settle down a little bit. And first order of business on tonight's agenda is to approve minutes of September 17th and October 15th. However, I want to draw attention to the committee that we actually only have the minutes of October 15th that are in this packet, and that is because we will be bringing back the September 17th meeting minutes for the committee's review and approval at our next meeting in December, just given some of the edits and changes that still need to be made. So with that, I'm going to allow just a few minutes to take a quick look if you haven't already had that chance. This was sent to you over the weekend, I believe. But please take a moment to take a look and see if there are any corrections you would like to make. And if not, I will take a motion. Mr. Nakajima.
I move to approve the minutes of October, 15th, 2019.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any edits or comments? If not, all those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. And we have a unanimous vote. Thank you. Minutes are approved for October 15th. Next item on the agenda is committee announcements. Do we have any announcements from the committee?
I just wanted to say that I was able to, I was invited to and accepted an invitation to attend the Mothers Out Front event yesterday. They're looking to explore ways that we can apply for additional funds to green our bus fleet. So it was kind of a kickoff event, and I was happy to have the invitation just to be part of the conversation as they're looking, as I think we all are, to reduce our carbon footprint.
Thank you, and I understand they had some members of the press there, some local news stories, right?
That's my understanding. I haven't seen them yet. I've seen the reports yet, though.
Great, thank you. Any other committee announcements? Mr. Demling.
So as you may be aware, the Student Opportunity Act, the massive education bill at the state level that has been pretty quickly recently making its way, appears to be on the final step. If you believe the Twitter sphere, the governor is set to sign it tomorrow afternoon, and it's a pretty huge bill, so I won't go over all the details here, but one of the interesting items for our committee is that it increases the annual funding of the MSBA from $600 million to $800 million, which is a pretty large increase, and as we know, one of the limiting factors of getting accepted into the MSBA is the fixed budget that they have. And so the fact that, knock on wood, potentially could be approved and in law prior to the MSBA deciding on December 11th for our statement of interest is very good news for our district. So I just wanted to let the public know that, and also thank the chair who has done a lot of advocacy, particularly in this act. I know you presented to the town council, you raised a lot of awareness of it, so that's very much appreciated.
Thank you, and you too, Mr. Demling. And just to reiterate that the governor is expected to sign this tomorrow. Hopefully, they're having a press conference, from what I understand, about 12:30 or so in the afternoon. So we will keep the committee apprised, and hopefully we have a signature. That would be great. Thank you. Any other announcements from the committee? Okay, with that, we will move on to public comment. So if any members of the public wish to make a comment to the committee, please feel free to come up to the microphone. You have 3 minutes to speak, and please state your name.
Vera Dwangmani Cage, Amherst resident, parent of 2 children in the regional school district. I want to make a comment relating to something that's on your agenda, the warrant approval process and vote. I would like to suggest to the committee to consider that the warrants be made publicly available for public review. I think that would be a very transparent initiative that is sorely needed in our district, with speculation that has been put forward by community members that there's been mismanagement or that there's money hidden and spent elsewhere that it wasn't designated. So I think that would serve that purpose. If not, I think people are just going to bombard the district with public records requests anyway. So I think the school district should be proactive and be forward-thinking and put all of it online for the community and the public to access. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Irene Kovne. I want to make a comment. It's a question I've been asking several times. I want to ask the committee, what are you doing to get ready for the MSBA decision that is going to happen in a couple of weeks? So Fort River School Building Committee presented several months ago their findings about Fort River. So if we are accepted, we'll have to know what to do with the 150 kids that do not fit in the current proposal to the MSBA of 600 students. So that means the consolidation of 3 schools into 2, and Mike Morris had proposed a 600-kid configuration for the new building. I know that the advisory vote for moving the 6th grade to the middle school, we probably won't have something to present until February. I'm part of the advisory vote on the 6th grade moving. So most likely until February, hopefully we might have something to present, but that's the timeline if we are lucky. The Crocker Farm study won't be ready probably until March. So if you're accepted, so Mike Morris today presented that the timeline might be a little bit more flexible, so it won't be April 1st. But are we getting ready to present and make a decision by that time? What are we going to tell to shorten the feasibility study if we are accepted? And if we are not accepted, I think we have to start thinking how I'm going to incorporate all these findings in the timeline to make the new presentation. I believe it's February. When is the new presentation, if we are not accepted? So again, we won't have some of these findings by the time you have to make a new presentation if we are not accepted this year. So I think the time is now to start thinking forward. Okay, best case scenario, if we are accepted, this is how we move forward. Worst case scenario, if we are not accepted, some of this information won't be ready. And truth to be said, if we don't know what to do with these 150 kids that do not fit in the current proposal, I'm doubtful that MSBA say, yes, go ahead, if you don't say, okay, these 150 kids are going to be in here or there. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the community? Okay, seeing none, we are going to close public comment. Next item on the agenda is Superintendent's update. Dr. Morris.
Sure, and I'll try to be relatively brief. So it's in the packet this time. So the first thing is an update from when Ms. Richardson came to talk about Caminantes, and we referenced that MABE, which is the Multi-State Association of Bilingual Education, was who supported us in the last 2 years, actually, to get this program off the ground, was coming back to do program evaluation as well as recommendations as the program expands to kindergarten and first grade for next year. And so what they're using is the guiding principles document that you may have seen before. I think it was presented to this body. It was quite a while ago, but it's on the second page of the superintendent update. And they were here last week. And, I'm sorry, I should say before I get to that, to look at outcomes. What is working well? Where are we on track? And what are high priority areas of focus? And the thinking is that they've supported many, many districts as they've started dual language programs, not just with the liftoff, so to speak, which is where we are, but with the growth over the years. As opposed to most initiatives going on in schools, this one is very gradual. So it happens one additional grade level a year for 7 years. And so they're the experts in our region. We found working with them to be incredibly helpful, and they planned 4 visit dates. As I said, they were here last week. They'll be back in January, February, and March, and they will formalize a report for the school committee either in April or May, depending how our meeting schedule goes, so that the committee and the community can get an update on how the program's going and what plans we're thinking of for next year. The reason we wanted to get them in November and then in early January is prior to budget season, so if there are budgetary implications that they're seeing before the report is completed, that we have that in mind and can look at that as well in our budget process. Not that they're expecting perfection. We're expecting everything to be perfect on November 20th. That wouldn't be a realistic perspective for a launch, but we wanted to get them in early so that we could get that perspective. And they, I won't go into the details of what they're doing when they're here, but they're observing classes, talking to teachers, talking to parents, and community members. For Fort River, additional, I want to compliment Ms. Chamberlain. She's been able to respond to parent feedback and requests from last year for Spanish-speaking students to have the opportunity to develop Spanish in school. This is just to cut a finer lens on it. This is not necessarily about Caminantes. Actually, it's primarily about the students in grades 1 through 6. as the program was getting started in grade K, a number of families and students said, what about us? You know, we're now a third grade student. It's great that it's happening in our school, great that it's going to inform our school for the last couple of years of our time there. So the UMass Spanish department has gathered with us some volunteers to offer a 5-week Spanish group starting this week, and it'll be, usually during lunch, a little bit during some specials time, so that students who have Spanish language background who want to continue that study, it's not the same as an immersion program, but it's trying to catch the wave, so to speak, in Fort River parlance of the work that's happening and provide additional supports for those students. So kudos to Ms. Chamberlain, and thank you to the UMass Spanish department for making that available.
So just a quick comment on that. My sons both came home with flyers, actually, about this, and I was able to get a little bit more information from my oldest son, who's already started participating. I believe this week was their first week, and it is using an app called Duolingo. So it is actually, a very, low-cost, high-tech program for students that already have a basis or a foundation in Spanish to be able to just practice using, a very simple tool, which a lot of us actually use whenever we're trying to learn a different language. So I just wanted to comment on that out loud because I think it's an innovative way to bring in, what a lot of parents have been saying they wanted for their kids, even if they can't participate in the Caminantes because they don't have a kindergartner at Fort River. But it's, it's a way to help students not feel left out, especially if they already have that foundation, and just to help them be a part of the process of learning Spanish in their school environment. So I just wanted to mention that. Mr. Nakajima?
Thanks. Could you elaborate on how the MABE process will also help improve planning for the next grade expansion the coming year?
Sure. So their process is to kind of twofold. One is to understand what's happening now at a deep level, understand benchmarking that against standards that are consistent in the field, and then to support us as we're expanding to first grade, because the development activities that are going on for not just for kindergarten and first grade actually started last summer. So we had first grade staff members looking at curriculum. We actually purchased some curriculum for first grade last year. But the intensity is a little different, like anyone else. If you're starting in 3 months versus you're starting in 15 months, it's going to feel a little different. And so they're really working to make sure our curriculum is aligned as we move up, knowing that the curriculum will be new to the teachers teaching it each year. And they're able to look at that and be a third-party source who's not in the weeds of this, but can come in and identify what's going well, what are some things we need to do differently, and also can help us align, because that newness is a unique challenge for us. Like if you talk about the math curriculum, which I referenced earlier, it's new in multiple grade levels at once, and the professional development can be done not all at once, it's ongoing, but not at the same way as this program. So they're able to support us and make recommendations around not just sort of materials, but around professional development and support, both instructionally, curricularly, and also in family outreach.
Yeah, sorry, thanks. And so as we're getting that feedback, I'm assuming that means then that staff from first and maybe even second grade are engaged as appropriate, sort of flies on the wall, and able to sort of just inculcate some of the feedback and learnings to improve their ability to be effectively at the ground next year? Absolutely, yes. And Ms. Richardson's doing an excellent job facilitating both the kindergarten, but also having an eye on first grade in particular at this time of year. That it's November, so we really need to be thinking about that. There was a cultural heritage fair at Fort River, which I was fortunate to attend. There's musical performances by folks in the community, food as well, and many thanks to the Fort River PGO. I wasn't at the event last year, but the report was that it was the attendance was significantly higher this year, and I think also was representational of who our students are and who our families are at the school level. So kudos to them. All of our schools have had their open houses or curriculum nights right now. All of our students have students facilitate and share the learning with their families, and we believe as a direct result, all of the attendance was high. That when we've involved students in the effort, it eliminates the need for childcare. We have buses that go to different places around town that support families to get there, and it was wonderful. And I was able to attend two of the three.
And harvest days happened at all of our sites. I was able to attend, again, 2 of the 3 of these as well, with students pulling out vegetables they'd planted. And the vegetables were turned into a vegetable soup, thanks to our food service department and collaboration. This soup was available free of charge for all students to taste. But I think more than even just the soup, which was neat in and of itself, seeing the process of, seeing the discovery process of students having done some work prior and then, being able to pull out the vegetables, and that whole process was pretty fantastic. The excitement was palpable, quite palpable, actually. At times, too palpable, but just the sense of for students like many people like myself who don't do a lot of planting, seeing the results of their fruits of their labor, so to speak, was pretty impressive. The last thing, which is not in the written packet, is just something I'd like to come back to, perhaps when we get to agenda planning, which is that MSAN, the Minority Student Achievement Network, it's always been a K-12 initiative for our district, or at least in recent memory has been. But I think because of the student conference, it's always a little more focused on the high school level than it is on K-8. And at the organizational level, they're really shifting that. For instance, their site visit in February is to a school district that's an elementary-only school district. They've increased the number of elementary-only school districts in the network. And so I would like to have a little more conversation with the committee, perhaps in December or January, about what that looks like, and to have more active conversations about MSAN as an organization that could support not just the secondary schools, but the elementary schools as well, because there's some really interesting work that's happening right now that is steering not only to the high school level, but really inclusive of this committee.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. And I actually, also just to brief the committee, spoke with Dr. Morris about this idea in particular, and think that there would be a lot of support from the community for bringing that conversation to the Amherst School Committee as opposed to just keeping it at the regional level. Mm-hmm. So I see nodding heads. Let's try to make that happen for an upcoming agenda. Thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions or comments for the superintendent, I will move us along. First item under new and continuing business is a follow-up to an earlier discussion that we had about the UMass study. So just to remind folks, this is a follow-up to the Donahue Institute study on the impact of tax-exempt housing on the finances of the school district. We spoke about this earlier this year and sat with the town council in a presentation actually about this study. So Dr. Morris, is there?
Sure. The brief update is this summer I was able to meet with the representatives of UMass as well as representatives of the town. If you look at page 13 of the study, which had the cost per student estimates and different ways to calculate what the cost would be, what I brought to that group was what I heard here and talked about and agreed with was that the committee wanted to stay away from trying to identify a per pupil cost that had any identifying information or it was about a specific student, and really just thinking about if the parcel was taxable, if it wasn't on the UMass campus, what would that cost be? I remember that Mr. Nakajima brought up a question around was there some value deflation because it's essentially subsidized by the university, and how would you calculate that? And so that's really what I brought to UMass and to the town as a conversation point. I think there was a positive response to that conversation. This is part of a larger UMass study, UMass Town partnership agreement that's being negotiated between the town, the school, and the university. I was only in for that kind of subsection around what does this study look like in relation to the schools. I'm not involved in the other parts of the study that are more relating to the town and the university. I think one caution point or concern that I brought up, and I have raised this with the town manager as well, is we're getting close to budget season. And there's a non-zero budget number that would be attached to any of these models. So if there was agreement, we have a closer sense of what that is. And I think the challenge is that the longer that the negotiations go on all the other pieces, the more uncertainty it has for the budget. Because in January, our plan would be to bring you an initial budget document, and it's hard to know what we can count on and what we can't, and it could have significant consequences, one way or the other, for what our budget is. So, I think to summarize, sorry, I'm still getting used to that. I brought the kind of ideas from the committee to that group. I think there was receptivity to that model. But as we're waiting for the town, and this isn't to put pressure on the town or the university on our account, but I think my view, or my opinion, my account, but my concern is that the longer this goes and we're presenting budget documents that could have a pretty big swing depending on the outcome of this. It's a concern for the community. There's been a lot of community interest. I'm not telling you all anything you don't know, that this has been a longstanding community concern, and so I just wanted to see if there was any guidance or thoughts that the committee wanted to have on next steps as it relates to this matter.
Mr. Nakajima, do you have a question for Dr. Morris?
I do. That was a lot you just threw at us, and I want to boil it down very simply. Are you suggesting that the discussion between the university and the town points toward the possibility that there might be some new revenue stream coming from the university, however calculated?
Yes.
Okay. Here's my suggestion. Okay, thank you. No, but I mean,
He boiled it down.
I'm not being critical. I'm just saying a reasonable person might not necessarily have teased that out of your previous statement. My advice to you is don't count on any of it. And at the point we get it, we can figure out what to do with it.
Mr. Demling.
So you mentioned that this is part of the greater UMass to town discussion, and that if that discussion does not resolve prior to our needing to make budget decisions, and that would be difficult to budget for, do you have any sense of how that greater conversation is going? I know you're not involved in all of those meetings, but are there indications that, yeah, everyone's on the same page and we're just about to wrap it up, or are people like, whoa, we've hit major obstacles and then we're nowhere the end in sight? I mean, that would inform whether we would advise or not for you to go back to that group and say, hey, do you think you could parse off this school piece first so that we might be able to take advantage of it?
So I do get regular updates. Excuse me. And I know the town manager will be giving one to the town council next month. I don't know exactly what that is, but I think it was hoped to be completed by now, and that's not to say that it won't be completed very soon, but I think if that's any indication of concern, it's really a timeline concern. I don't have more details on how it's going. It's more just that it's taken longer than perhaps some people hoped. Or that's vague. I just don't have more context than that.
Do you have a follow-up question, Mr. Demling, or?
I mean, I guess just if you're asking for guidance, I guess my just simple guidance would be that unless there is strong indication that the entire thing is going to wrap up and sidetracking them to focus on this specific sub-issue would be unproductive, then yeah, I think it would be advisable to have that greater group focus on just this issue, see if we can't get to resolution on just this, so that it could have a positive budgetary impact for us as soon as possible.
Mr. Nakajima.
Yeah, I probably was a little too glib earlier. I think the challenge when we're talking about budgeting, and I know you know this, but you're asking for advice, I'm just saying, I'm going to say out loud something you already know. What's the nature of the revenue? What's the source of the revenue stream? How durable is it? How much is it? We can't hire people on the basis of a well-intended promise that could work out for 1 fiscal year or 2 fiscal years and then dry up, right? Because then we're stranding staff where we can't figure out how to pay for them. We can't stand up new programs doing the same thing too. So the challenge on something like this, which is why I gave a shorter and more glib response earlier, was that it is highly welcome, of course, if the university can find a way to provide any durable revenue stream or even actually periodic grants to the district. In other words, if every 2 years they gave us $50,000 to do some good thing, we could find good things to do it and plan it appropriately in budget. But I think getting a good sense of that, of the nature of the funding, the level of the funding, and then beyond that, sort of the durability and the effect that it has on if we got hit by a great recession at the state level. Could we anticipate this is the first thing gone? And that's not to be negative. It's basically to help us with planning. And so it's more than just is there revenue that could potentially be flowing into the schools? To me, there's a lot of other things that need to be known, which is why it almost feels to me like a budgeting exercise for next year or for mid-year or for, you know what I mean? Once there's a lot more facts that are known for it. But I'm sorry to go on so long.
And I think I would just, throw in, I remember when we first heard this report in that joint meeting that we had with the town council, that I had expressed some frustration that, there were no recommendations actually being made by the report itself, but rather just a list of problems that are sort of outlined. And then also, I think beyond that it still strikes me that the problem is sort of, described in a way that makes you feel like they're shrugging their shoulders, just sort of saying, well, the taxes that are collected don't ever adequately cover, tuition per pupil, and which is true, but at the same time isn't necessarily showing leadership from, our state university that happens to also share land and space and resources with our town. And so I think, to echo both Mr. Nakajima and Mr. Demling, a solution that is sustainable is preferable sooner rather than later. And this is an opportunity, I think, for, our partners here in town to provide some actual solutions and to say, here are some things that we could propose, whether it's, grant money that we can help move or new initiatives or programs or resources to help support some of the work of the district. There's a lot of different places here, and I think this is what the community has been asking for a number of years. I remember sitting in town meeting waiting for, people just feeling very, very anxious about this conversation kind of going in circles, and it's starting to feel like it's very similar to this. And it's not a criticism of the group that's working on this or anything like that, but I think we have reached a point where we've gotten beyond just outlining the problems, and that really we need to get to solutions at this point. So I'm also sharing that anxiety, that hoping that you can adequately convey to the group that this is something that needs remedying sooner rather than later. Ms. Spitzer?
So I just want to echo the feeling that I think this is part of a much bigger problem that none of us are going to be able to solve, but there's a nice symbiotic relationship between UMass and the community. So they have an interest in our schools, remaining strong, and obviously I don't think the town of Amherst would be what it is without the university's presence. So that being said, I have a question, because this has to do with the North Village apartments, and my understanding is that that complex, they have plans to fundamentally change the population that's using it. So I think this highlights an issue with this type of solution. Is that, so say, and I'm not sure what the future of North Village is. It's been in the news and I haven't been following it as closely as I should, but I don't think we should tie their support for our schools to one property in particular. That to me seems problematic. I mean, our town, as they say, no one property funds our schools, no one taxpayer is paying enough taxes to fund the cost of educating the kids who are going. It's a group effort. It takes a village, and in this particular case, it's not just this one property that is contributing to the issue of us not having as much taxable properties in our town to support all of these kids who we educate. So I'm not being as eloquent as I'd like to on this, but I guess I guess I want to follow up on this question. Are we tying it to North Village in light of what's happening? Is that known? And I would just state that I think it shouldn't be. I know that people before us made this decision to investigate this, so it's not a criticism. It's just, I think what's happening in the news right now highlights the need to think of it more broadly.
Ms. McDonald?
I think I would just echo a lot of what I'm hearing from everybody else in the committee, but also just to add emphasis that this idea of sustainability, which also gets at the comment about that it's, right now this is based on one property. And, while no organization can sort of commit in perpetuity some sort of revenue provision for our town and our schools, something that is a little bit more reliable and not sort of a point in time that may change completely within, a foreseeable future. We can't build the budget on something, if it's just a one-time grant, that's one thing, and we wouldn't obviously turn that down. But from a budgeting perspective and a planning perspective for the sake of our schools, we need something that is a little bit more sustainable, or at least we can sort of count on it, right? We can't count on funding from the state. That's always a chance, but we do know from our property tax revenues that there's certain assumptions that we can make going forward, and look forward several years out. And something similar from the university would be more beneficial than something that's based on one single property that may be turned over completely.
Dr. Morris, did you want to respond? You look like you want to respond.
Yes, I guess I do. So I think in terms of North Village, I think the attempt was that this would be a reliable funding source, in terms of what the report said. It is being, the plans are to rebuild that. But I guess maybe I'll reframe the question that I'm looking for feedback on, which is that there's a ongoing, and I'm sorry for repeating myself, hopefully I'm saying it differently, so there's an ongoing negotiations between the town and the university. And so there's one slice that's related to the schools. There's a whole lot that's not related to schools. And this isn't the only slice. Just to be really clear, but this was the primary talking point. I thought I took what I took what I thought was the school committee's thoughts and shared it with UMass. We had a good conversation, and I want to characterize it as agreement because there's no agreement. It was I thought there was receptivity and a worthwhile, honest conversation about it. And so my question tonight was, is there anything you want me to do, given that we're getting to a budgetary timeline where we're going to have it? So I thought what I heard, or what I took notes on, was some comments about, it's going to be hard to be guaranteed. It needs to be reliable. It needs to be something we can bank on if we're going to, charge people salaries and other things that are not soft costs, so to speak, to it. I heard some that, if there's a way to kind of expedite things for the school so it could count for the budget. And then I also heard that maybe some dissatisfaction with looking at North Village as a mechanism by which there might be some financial exchange between the university and the schools. So I'm just not sure how to reconcile, or what the committee would like me to do. And so I'm okay with any of those things, but I guess I'm looking for a little clarity if it's possible for the committee to direct me on this matter. Because just a little context, when this was presented originally, there was a request for the committee to have me as a direct participant in negotiations with the town and the university. So I tried to do that with what at least at that time, the feedback I was hearing. And if something's changed with that, or if there's a different directive, then I just want to make sure I'm accountable to the will of the committee.
Mr. Nakajima?
Dr. Morris, I don't think you're doing a great job. keep at it. Honestly, you're asking for guidance from us, and you're looking to try to figure out a path forward. I think there's a relationship between the question of the source, size, and stability of any kind of contribution that UMass would make to the town for education, and the question of North Village, right? If North Village goes away, or the composition of families versus non-families in North Village changes, as was pointed out by Ms. Spitzer, then the question ends up being, well, does that mean the commitment of the university changes because they're doing it on a per capita basis, or what, right? And the reality is, since to get into that question is to go deep into the recesses of Whitmore and try to understand what the thinking of UMass is. My blunt advice would be, if they think they're going to be in a position to have an impact upon the upcoming fiscal year, they need to make, for want of a better way of phrasing it, you and the town manager an offer. What's the offer? And it needs to be as specific as possible. And then once one does that, you can evaluate it. But I think under those circumstances, you've gotten lots of advice of follow-up questions that would try to ascertain what the features of that deal are and how we might understand it.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just, again, reiterate, I think this is an opportunity for them to show leadership, right? That's exactly what I was referring to. I think Mr. Nakajima's points, eloquently drive that home, that we are looking for them to actually make some suggestions on ways that they can help repair some of the problems that have been outlined for a number of years. So it's not the district, I think, that necessarily has to, come forth and say, this is what we need or want. I mean, I think, you've been empowered by this committee to do that. If there are things that you feel like, the university could be beneficial in helping fund or, helping to drive, I think the committee would be open to supporting that and hearing that. But I think in this stage of negotiations, it's really to drive through the message that we're looking to them to, to try to address whatever way that they think they can, things that could be usable and feasible for us in the upcoming year. Mr. Demling, I saw your hand up. I don't know if there's another additional comment. Then we're going to move on.
Yeah, that I agree with everything the two of you have just said. And I just think, just to put a point on it, it's understandable that this is a complex calculation and all the variables are going to be defined. But I think even if it's at the minimum, or the low end of what the university thinks it can contribute in the future, that might increase in the future, having something meaningful that happens for next fiscal year, I think would be greatly appreciated by the committee. I think that you could probably articulate and bring back as a message.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Morris. Okay, I'm going to move us along then. Next item on the agenda is the sixth grade study update. And so, again, this is an ongoing conversation that we continue to bring back to the committee on our agendas, just to hear updates about progress that's being made on the work of the Grade Span Advisory Board, and to talk about next steps. We heard at least one comment from a community member earlier today during the public forum about this issue as it relates to future capital projects and other work that's going on. So this is something that we're continuing to try to raise regularly with the committee so that we can just stay abreast of that. So, Dr. Morris?
Sure. And Ms. McDonald, you can jump in anytime you like. So I was trying to think of what artifacts to put in the packet. All of our artifacts are on our website, which includes, raw artifacts like pro-con lists that different groups came up with. But I think it might be worthwhile to talk about the last meeting, which is the first part of the agenda packet, which occurred last week on the 18th. And we had a video conference in from a sixth grade teacher who is on sabbatical, who's doing work on project-based learning. This person has been a middle school teacher in a different state and has taught sixth grade in our district, so has a broad range of knowledge and skills of what things look like in a middle school setting versus an elementary school setting. He developed, or he shared three, in addition to talking about project-based learning and how that could be a developmental fit from what we've learned about the developmental needs of early adolescence. He presented, or shared three, I want to say it was 3 or 4, but I'm looking at Ms. McDonald, I think it was 3 different schedules from schools that are doing high-quality project-based learning at a middle school level. And one of the things that in the prior meeting in October, the group wanted is to get to nuts and bolts a bit, and what would this actually look like? And so, we budgeted 45 minutes for that. I think we took maybe close to twice that, but it was time well spent to dig into the academic piece. We then took a break and we decided that taking a walkthrough of the middle school, so point number 5, to look at the space and how it's used would be really helpful. So we went upstairs to the middle school and the co-principals led us on a tour of the middle school, and particularly looking at the prior work of the facilities, the master facilities use group. Where would the 6th grade students be? Where would 7th grade students be? Where would 8th grade students be? Where would special needs classrooms be? We did talk about some of the infrastructure that was mentioned before about, we went to a potential makerspace, the wood shop that could be converted to a makerspace. And so I think it really helped for everyone to get a tangible visual of what, because it's one thing to look at a map, it's another thing to walk the building and reimagine where students would be located. I think you get a very different feel. I don't know your experience, Ms. McDonald, with that, but that's what I heard from many people, because many of the people on the committee have not walked upstairs before. They have not yet middle school parents or staff members, and if they're an elementary staff member, they likely don't go upstairs, the PD center or other things for meetings that would happen at the middle school level. We then got into a conversation of what to do with the pros and cons, and one staff member agreed to write a summary, because I think it's like 17 or 27 pages long. It's a long list of pros and cons. So there's a lot of duplicates because it was done by small groups, so she's going to do that. We did have a conversation about community feedback and what's the right time to get it, and could there be some presentation of information to see how the community feels. So then at the end, we made 3 subgroups. I'm just going to pull them up because I want to make sure I don't get them incorrect. So one is community feedback and outreach. So that group is going to be working on exactly that. What's our mechanisms to receive outreach from the larger community, both staff members as well as larger community members? There's one subgroup on the final product to try to think about what is it that we want to present to the larger community. Is it a written report? Is it a slide deck? Is it both? And what's the presentation mechanism that would be used? And the last one's on academic programs, and that one is much more focused, has more staff members, as you might expect on that one, as well as people like, Mr. Sheehan and curriculum folks, taking a look at what Mr. Eggermeyer presented, what would academic programs look like, and how would they be different if 6th grade was at the middle school versus at the elementary, just based on staffing, facilities, and a reimagining of the use. So those groups' task is before our next meeting in December to do some work and to present at our December meeting. So it kind of pushes the envelope going forward. One of the things I know heard feedback about was timeline of decision making. That's certainly something that this body, as well as perhaps another body or 3 other bodies, might want to, we'll have to talk about. My own personal perspective from an operational level, having lived through a major transition with Marks Meadows closure in 2010, is that having 2 summers is an absolute necessity. So if a change was to happen, that we'd have 2 summers to plan for it. So in other words, that a decision would be made in one academic year, there'd be another academic year, and then a change to occur, if it was to occur. It was invaluable in that other experience. The decision was made a year and a half in advance of the actual change happening. Having been a principal at the time, I don't think we could have pulled off. I mean, at my school, at Crocker Farm, there was something like 38% of students were new to Crocker Farm that year. We had significant neighborhoods that weren't part of Crocker Farm that joined, and while this is a different change, having that first summer to do all the work with staff members, not with the change being super imminent, allowed us to do a much, much better job. And I think most people in the community would consider that process, however painful, was done well by the district. And I don't think people would have had that same impression if we were making a decision in a year prior to that change happening. I think one summer is just not enough. And the school year, it's just really hard to have the quantity and quality of time to have staff members and the community members feel comfortable with that change and make sure all those pieces are planned for. So my personal, that's not saying that's the group. I want to be really clear, that's not the advisory board's opinion. That's my opinion based on my lived experience. That's not a decision that's been come to or made by the advisory board. But I think it is relevant. I think the other thing that I would argue for, much like that process, is that we have a very deliberate process with the committees and the communities to be weighing these changes. That I think, just a quick phrase that I often use is fast is bad. That I get the urgency and I understand the piece and the connection to the Amherst elementary schools, but there's nothing, if a change was to happen or not change, a change wasn't to happen in the end. Anyone feeling like it was a rushed change or rushed decision or rushed vote on the committee, I think even if it happened, it's going to actually have a broad negative impact on the district at large, even if it's the right decision. It's going to have a broad negative impact. So in terms of this particular board, I think we're hoping to get to a place where we have a presentation in January, February, where we're able to lay out multiple options for the community to respond to. And really, that's not the end of the engagement. I think in many ways, that'll be the beginning of the engagement. And where we land in January, February, I can guarantee will be different than where we land, even with the final recommendation, one way or the other, in the end. But I think giving the community something to respond to that's tangible, gathering feedback, that process really needs to start as this group finishes. We have our public website. We've been trying to be transparent. I know Ms. McDonald put together something that went in the newsletter a couple months ago for that, and we'll continue to share with the community about that. But I think truly engaging the community requires the background work that's happening right now. So I'm not on that subcommittee, but I certainly appreciate the urgency of that subcommittee to start engaging as more information is coming in and kind of more models are developed for the community to respond to, because I know the community is interested in responding.
Ms. McDonald, is there anything that you want to add to Dr. Morris's comments?
That was very thorough. I was scribbling notes of things that I wanted to say, and then you proceeded to say a lot of them. So I think I'll just sort of reiterate about the subgroups that are doing some work now between the last meeting and our next meeting, because there is sort of a strong desire to really dig into it. And the meetings, it's a very large group, and we're trying to be mindful of people's time and not have these 4-hour long meetings. I'm looking around, there's several folks that are on the working group in here. And it's very difficult to have these deep conversations and rich give and take in that large group. So I think that is a positive step forward. I think also particularly the pros and cons work, that was one of the ones that I marked down as being really important, because the group, after having done a lot of study and sort of listening, reading, discussing, digesting of the middle level learner developmentally, put together a series of, together in small groups, these pros and cons. And what it is pros and cons of educating 6th graders in the elementary school, as well as pros and cons of educating 6th graders in a middle school environment. So trying to look at it as if we were making a decision fresh and not from the perspective that we're in the elementary school right now and potentially evaluating moving to the middle school. And so it's sort of, looking both ways. And I think that together, once that's compiled, will be a really rich and valuable resource for the community to look at, to see sort of what this group of individuals, community members and staff have pulled together having done that hard work of learning and reading and researching this topic. And then the other very robust discussion is around the community and staff outreach. And I share Dr. Morris's opinion that because we've had such a long on-ramp to, and I would say the luxury of having the time to dig into all of these topics, that it's easy to forget that the rest of the community doesn't have that same information. And I think it's really important for us to be able to present that in a succinct, easily understood way, and also with the breadcrumbs so that people who want to dig into it can, before sort of sharing perspective. Because as many of us in the group experienced when we first got there, a lot of us came in with sort of very knee-jerk or visceral reactions, negative or positive, to this, without having the background information. And I think we're all coming to more nuanced understandings of it. I don't think it's going to be a clear cut. I think, but I think having that conversation and building that community discussion is really important, and having that informed discussion is going to be really important. So I see that as being really important work for us to begin in January after the group finishes its work and is able to put it together. I do see significant opportunity, though, for us to be more clear about what the steps are in the overall process. Mm-hmm. I've struggled myself with that, as I know so many people on the working group have, and I think over the next 6 weeks, we owe it to the community to be, I think, more, and not locked in stone, but just a little bit more clear about what the options are from both a timeline perspective, but also what are the decision points that, and sort of different pathways that we might end up taking. And I think that will really help the conversations going forward with the community.
Dr. Morris, did you want to respond?
Just one additional point I forgot to mention is last week, Mr. Rodriguez, who's the facilitator, Norm Price, who's a middle school science teacher, and I did a window into ARPS, where we tried to share what's happening with the group, what's being studied, and their perspectives on things. So I think as just at least a first additional, it's not the first because our website's updated regularly, but a different vehicle to be able to share with the larger community what work's happening. I think that medium is going to be very helpful, and I think that'll come out likely the week because of this week being a different week with the break and everything. It'll likely come out next week, but we'll share that far and wide so that it gives a nice introduction, and both of them did a great job describing their roles, their understandings of elementary and middle school, and what the group's trying to do.
That's great. And I just have a very brief comment. I think, I agree with Ms. McDonald just in terms of clearly articulating what the milestones are so that the community can better understand what that is, because clearly we have, we already have some confusion. We can only expect that confusion to worsen as more people become aware of what's happening. And we talked about this, I think, a few months ago also, that as we were embarking on this work, that there was a lot of potential there for miscommunication, misunderstanding, and this is not something that we want to get wrong, because it matters a lot to the students, as well as families and caregivers and educators. It's a huge change in the district potentially. So definitely something that we want to be very careful with and be clear about from day one. And then I think I heard you mention that the subcommittee working on communication with the community is supposed to come back in December with some suggestions for ideas, but then I also heard you say that a presentation will be made in January or February. So it sounds to me like that might be a little off there. If the subcommittee is coming in December to make a recommendation about how to engage the community, you probably won't be ready by January at the very least, and February might be a bit of a stretch. So I'm just thinking about how to communicate that back to the board about thinking carefully about how those timelines are being set as well, and to make sure that we're communicating really well too with this committee so that we can help promote and share those milestones, because again I think people will have strong opinions about this, and we want to hear them, and we want to make sure that they're being reflected in the work that's going on. Dr. Morris?
I'm not on that subcommittee, so I can't speak for that group specifically, but what I can say is that I think there's broad interest in, as a report gets completed and communicated, how is that report the beginning of the outreach effort, so that it's not just a report plops on multiple school committees' desks and have fun with it, but that there's an articulated response and plan for actively gathering community input along the way. So I think, I'm looking at Ms. McDonald, who's been a little more connected than me, but I think that's an accurate reflection.
I think I agree. I think that is actually exactly the topic that the group is wrangling right now, is exactly what that timing and approach would be. Because I think there's differences of perspective on that in terms of when is the right time to reach out. And I don't think the group has come to any conclusion on that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nakajima.
So, Dr. Morris, based on the listening sessions we did last spring, there's, I think, a broad understanding that there is a potential in a relationship between the work of the sixth grade of the middle school and planning for a new elementary school building if we were to get into that process. And so I imagine for a lot of people in the public, and I think we heard this reflected in the forum comments earlier, there's a sense that the timing of one affects the timing of the other. And just speaking for myself, I applaud the notion that everything we do around planning for sixth grade of the middle school, whatever that decision ends up being, is done in the most educationally sound and inclusive way possible, and that it not be unduly rushed because of other planning. I'd also say that as we've all sort of already voted and expressed, we really want a new elementary school building. And so what I'm wondering if you could, and the answer is you don't know, or not, you don't know, but you're not prepared to say, that's a perfectly great answer. But I do think if you have an answer to the question of what the relationship in a macro level is between the timing of the sixth grade of the middle school work and the initial steps for the feasibility study and the MSBA process, if we were to be accepted, I'd love to either hear it now, or I'd really love to hear it on the 17th if we're accepted, because I think what's going to happen is members of the public who might otherwise strongly support the work that you're doing and the methodical way you're doing it are going to get frustrated if they don't understand how the two processes can be mutually supportive in terms of the resolution.
So I can hazard a start, and then I can come back next month with more detail, and I'll keep my fingers crossed that it really matters that we have this detail, right? But I think in terms of what I said with fast is better, I think one of the things I'm talking about is implementation, not decision making. I mean, that could be argued for both, but in the best case scenario in our MSBA process, we're going to be 4 or 5 years out from actually having a new building. So that's plenty of time in terms of implementing the change if we were to make it, but I think the challenge is for the planning side, I think that's what you're referring to. I just want to be clear about that if we report in January or February, I think it's certainly reasonable to think about next fall being at a place where we've engaged the community for 6 or 7 months, we've refined models when we get to fall or winter of next year. At that point, we'll have architects on board, we'll have owner project manager on board, and I think the timeline will mesh very well, but I'll articulate that more clearly next month. But I want to say that I do see those two. I think the ability to make that decision around 6th grade in a way that's not rushed is certainly possible. I don't want anyone to misread my earlier comments that we need 2 summers to make a decision. It's really about 2 summers to, and I know you know this, but I just don't want any confusion. My comment about 2 summers is really about implementing, once a decision's made, to make sure the staff have enough time to make that change effectively.
Mr. Demling.
Yeah, so Mr. Nakajima said most of what I was going to say. I don't think it can be overemphasized enough that if we are lucky enough to get into the MSBA on the 11th, that's going to take top billing. It's just the nature of what the community's been paying attention to, and this won't. And not that this is any less important, but yeah, in terms of public communication and showing a timeline schedule that you can reasonably commit to in an easily discoverable place, I think is going to be extremely important. I think it's good to take the time to have something tangible before engaging the community. In my former life as chair of the Amherst Pelham Regional School District Planning Board, we spent a lot of time trying to digest what we had learned into a presentable format where someone walking into a room cold could get up to speed really quickly on a complex topic. And that's really the challenge. It's as much a PowerPoint communication challenge as it is a content challenge. So I think you're doing that the right way. In terms of educator engagement, it would be great, and I understand this is probably a Herculean scheduling task, but to get all the 6th grade teachers in our districts together and get their input, I'm sure of all of the different cohorts of educators, 6th grade teachers probably have a lot to say about this particular topic. So if that's possible for the board, that would be great. And I would think as well similarly for the middle school. That might actually be a little easier to schedule. There's probably regular meetings of middle school educators, but they would obviously have a good point of view about what the nature is of having a small graded school where everyone's coming together at the first time, what those issues are when you bring all the 7th graders together.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Morris. So I'm going to move us along. The next item on the agenda is budget guidance strategic program requests. And so this discussion was set up to provide feedback to the superintendent on areas of the budget that we, the school committee, would like reports on next month as part of the budget guidance process. And in past years, this often has looked like asking for special presentations from different subject areas, different educators and administrative roles. But I will turn it over to you, Dr. Morris.
Right. So I think that was a good summary. Thank you. And we try to keep it to 2, maybe 3 areas for strategic program reviews. One, which is in my goals, is already scheduled for next month about the early childhood access, and that's partnership with the town of Amherst as well as the Amherst Public Schools. But if there are 1 or 2 other areas that you'd like to hear a program review on, we can certainly, to inform the budget process, we can do that. So it's trying to get feedback from the board of areas. In the past couple of years, we've focused a lot on specials and some of the other areas. One thing I was wondering about is the family center, and I don't want to promote that. Well, I guess I quasi am promoting that idea, but I don't want to pigeonhole the committee into it. But they haven't. We actually haven't had an update particularly at the Amherst elementary level in the family center in a long time. They've taken on an enrollment of elementary students this year, so there's a bit of a changeover in terms of registrar and enrollment, which has high impact on that. They were heavily involved in terms of the Comandantes program and communicating around that. So I wondered, because it's been a while, and as committee members have changed over time and will continue to do so, it might be a good thing to hear a bit more from the family center, particularly as it focuses on the elementary schools and not secondary. So that's just one other suggestion, but I'm open to anything that people want to share.
So I am assuming that the committee has thought about this, but it's always one of those kinds of topics that comes up and feels like enormous, as opposed to, something that we can provide some very specific information or guidance on. So I am going to take comments, I think, maybe starting from Mr. Demling and just making our way down, so that, if you don't have anything, that's totally okay. I think Dr. Morris can certainly come up with some ideas, and you can also share that with myself or Dr. Morris in between meetings. But Mr. Demling, do you want to get us started?
So in general, your comment is very well taken, that this is a massive topic, and so you could go 100 different ways. I would certainly love to hear about the family center, and particularly if they're expanding more into the elementary level, what that is, with real specific examples. I'd love to get anecdotes and stories from staff and what they're doing and how they're engaging. I like to see, it's great when there's crossover between your goals and what we're considering for the budget. Not necessarily that it has to be a one-to-one correlation, but if there's themes that are reflected there, they're by definition things that we've already discussed a great deal that are important to the committee. So things like social emotional support and wellness, how that's evolved. I think for a lot of these general topics, how the needs are changing is really informative for the committee, because we're not in the schools. And so even if we had a kid, in sixth grade 3 or 4 years ago, it might not be the same level of need. And so whether this is support for homeless students, whether this is support for students with trauma at different ages, or a whole host of things, I think that would be a educating and informative topic for the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Demling. Ms. McDonald, do you have any comments you want to add at this time, or we can come back? No. Okay. Ms. Spitzer?
First off, I just want to echo what Mr. Demling said, and we've brought this up a few times, and I don't see it on the agenda yet. Maybe this is the right place to talk about homelessness and foster care and the impact it's having on our budgets, from not just from a budget perspective. I think all aspects. And then the other thing is something that's come up, kind of conversations with the community. There seems to be a lot of interest in understanding what's going on with the farm-to-school positions / gardens and intersection with food. So I'm not sure which piece of that would be worthy of, if it's possible to kind of think about it as more holistically. You brought up the great experience with the soup making and harvest, and I think it would be nice to know how, does that have long-term financial support, and if not, how could we support it more long-term?
I think that I agree. It'd be great to hear about the family center. I think that, for all the reasons that you stated, make absolute sense. I actually am interested in hearing, in addition to early childhood, which you were already planning on doing, I think I would love to get a little bit more information from our curriculum director about, and last time we had heard from Mr. Sheehan, it was early last year, and I think we had agreed that he would be coming back at some point soon just to talk about some of the changes that are being implemented. And I think especially in light of the strategic improvement plans for the different schools, it would be great to hear how that's, sort of correlating and if there are additional supports that we can make, quite frankly, in the budget to, help his work and the work of his team and our educators. So, I think I would really appreciate having a budget guidance conversation around curriculum specifically and the resources that we're applying.
Thank you. I love hearing about farm to school stuff, also because I think it's an extension of our conversation around food and programming, and so I think it's a great thing to do. To me, it's hard for us as a committee to pick a line item or pick a department and then talk about it in terms of its holistic impact, in terms of student outcomes or even cohorts. And so, and I'm saying this also because we've been at this rodeo a couple times, and it always feels like sometimes both good and also a little frustrating to pick something and hear about it. It's kind of interesting, and what do you do? So to me, there's a through line, and this echoes some things Ms. Ordonez is just saying, that there's a through line in the strategic plans around achievement gaps, around wellness, around family support. Obviously, that should, I assume, correspond to what the Family Center is doing in the elementary schools, other than enrollment. And so, to me, what I would love to hear, especially because a core part of the strategic school improvement plans were, in fact, centered around these issues, and I think it also hits quite a bit of what Mr. Demling was mentioning earlier, a moment ago, on wellness and support. Is I would love to hear a budget guidance update that could help us understand where dollars spent and where program activities, based upon what you think, what Family Center thinks, what you're hearing from the schools, could have the best impact. So developmentally, as you were doing you setting your plans were to be engaged in the buildings and to work on thinking about how to support the schools and implementing their strategic plans. We're now going to be 6 months in. So what have we learned? And you know what I mean? So I don't know if the committee would agree with it, but speaking for myself, what I would like to hear is I would like to hear a program update that goes into understanding what we might do with the budget and what personnel are doing or what our professional development is doing corresponds strategic action that supports student wellness, family engagement, and ultimately student achievement and achievement gaps.
Thank you, Mr. Nakajima. Dr. Morris, any immediate responses, or is that helpful?
Thank you. We'll figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
And I guess my only response would be there were a number of things mentioned that I think when we've tried to do too many things at a meeting on this topic, the meetings went very late, and I think the utility has been diminished. And so what I'm going to think about is what things to bring next month, specific to budget guidance, and what are things that we should absolutely get to, but perhaps at different points in the agenda or different times in the calendar year. But this is all very helpful, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is warrant approval process and vote. So this item originated with the Regional School Committee. It was a discussion around warrant approvals. And it's basically to decide on a warrant signing process so that either, and this is a vote that came up at the Regional Committee, I should say, that we would establish a process so that either the entire committee will vote to approve warrants at each meeting, rather than the way we currently have it, which is we all sign off on warrants, but they're not discussed as an agenda item, or we designate one committee member to sign warrants and update the committee at each meeting. And again, the Amherst School Committee sits on the Regional School Committee. This is a topic that was discussed at that level, but we thought it important to bring back to this committee for decision-making, discussion, and possible vote. And I think that, this, again, is bringing us in alignment with some fairly recent changes that were made at a state level that require there to be more transparency around warrants, and to make sure that, the committee is making the public aware and also paying close attention to how the warrants are signed and what's happening. So these are all good things. So I don't know if, Dr. Morris, if there are any other comments or things that you want to add to this.
Nope, it's just the business office will work with the committee on whatever it chooses to facilitate what we hope will be a smooth process either way.
So I think the question before this committee is, first, if there are any additional questions or comments that the committee would like to raise. Ms. McDonald.
I'm just a question, and I don't know if we have the answer right now or if it's more convoluted, but just because we are talking about the warrants, we did have the comment from the community member earlier about can the warrants be made public when we do vote on them. Presumably, regardless of which way we go, it would be signing warrants would be an agenda item going forward. And is that something that's even within the realm of possibility?
Dr. Morris?
So I'm hesitant to speak without the finance director here, but my understanding is that there are some times where we do have to, for the public consumption, conceal some things in warrants because it does involve, for instance, out-of-district placements with student initials and those pieces. So it's whether the committee would want the staff to put the additional time in to protect the anonymity of, because there are students' initials on, some items on warrants. And so I think that'd be the question for the committee is, and that's probably as far as I can go without him being present tonight.
And I think for tonight's discussion, from what I remember, the conversations of us having previously are that the way that this is typically done is that we will provide a summary of the different areas of the warrants that are presented as part of the agenda. So again, whether the entire committee is approving them or whether it's one person designated, regardless, the summaries for each of the warrants signed during each cycle are presented as part of the agenda. So there is that added information there. And, I'm presuming that we can actually still make a decision and a vote tonight, even if we don't necessarily address that question that came up earlier today during community. But I do agree that it would be important to think about that and talk about that. Mr. Demling?
I move to change our warrant signing process to designate one committee member to sign warrants and update the committee at each meeting.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion or comments? This is for a motion to designate one committee member to sign warrants and update the committee at each meeting, which is similar to what we have at the regional level. So the two committees would actually be in alignment with each other. Spitzer?
So we're all learning, and I just ended up getting designated as the person to come in case somebody wasn't available, and I just experienced that I was surprisingly asked to do it, and then I was in Springfield for 2 days, and so it actually became kind of, I'm doing it now, but I guess I'm wondering about the utility of just voting, because then nobody needs to take out of the time out of their day to actually go over to the business office, unless there's a strong reason not to a more urgent reason to do it. Or if members really feel like if there's somebody here who feels like they have the time to make it part of their workday to go over to the business office and sign the warrants on a, right? I just want to be open about the fact that this will be requiring somebody to take time out of their workday to go over to the business office during business hours. And we should make sure that we're comfortable, at least one of or two of us is comfortable with that right now.
So we do have a motion, and we do have a second for motion, which is to have one person designated. So the person who made the motion could withdraw their motion.
Oh, we can't just...
Well, it's just because it's so different from what was moved. So, or we could, take a vote and vote against it.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
bring up my experience over the last week with it.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. I'm just, technically we're in this weird gray area right now. So I think the question, Ms. McDonald.
Thank you for sharing your experience, because I would, being somebody who would not be able to volunteer to be that person, it's really helpful to hear your personal experience. And I think it's probably difficult for us to take a vote on this without knowing if one of us is willing to step up and be that person.
So would the person who made the motion be willing to withdraw the motion? Mr. Demling.
If I'm stating this correctly, I withdraw my motion. Is that all I have to say?
That's all you have to say, I think.
Then it has been said.
Yeah, okay.
Can you,
So I think that, again, the point is legitimate. Mr. Nakajima?
Could, I don't know, Dr. Morris, if you remember, could you, or maybe the chair does, could you remind us what the process for voting the warrants would be? Meaning, in other words, is it analogous to what the report is, or that the person is making, if there's one person, or is it literally you pick a piece of paper and you vote it, or what? Do we know?
I believe it's very similar to what it would be instead of one person doing it and reporting on it. It's just done at a group meeting, but I don't think there's a appreciable difference in terms of what the committee. No, I take it back. I'm sorry. I think the outcome's the same, but the difference is one person's taking a look at the warrants and signing off on them for the committee and reporting, as opposed to everyone, kind of the current model where the warrants go around. It would just be a public vote on them. So I think there is a difference in terms of what the committee sees or doesn't see as a full body. I apologize.
And so just as a point of clarification also, I think if there are any conflicts of interest among the individual committee members, that would be something that, would be reflected in the votes for the warrants. Mr. Nakajima and then Ms. Spitzer.
Oh, you can go.
Ms. Spitzer.
No, so I believe that there would be at least one of us who probably wouldn't be able to do this.
That's exactly
so
right.
Out of the three of us, can I just be blunt about this? I'm looking at Anastasia's not going to be with us much longer. Allison, I guess Eric, are you in a position where you could regularly make it to the business office to sign these? Because if not, I think then we need to do the voting option.
I can right now, but I don't know if I can commit to that going forward. So it's like, so it's actually, you know what I mean? So like, I could right now say, like, every Friday morning, I'll just carve out time in my schedule and go. But if that changes, then it changes, and it just does. No, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
So let me, Dr. Morris, so just to go back through it again, what we'd have to do presumably is we would have to make the warrants available in the business office and then prior to the meeting, and then people would have to try to make sure, and then I guess they could be emailed them, but the point is they'd have to make sure that they look at them. And then, I mean, I'm not trying to be funny about this, but like genuinely look at them. And then there would have to be a motion sheet prepared that would allow us to vote by category as is described in the reports that we're doing, the secondary level, right?
Yeah, that's what I was just looking back at. I was just looking at my phone. I was looking at the email from district council that was detailing that to make sure what I was saying. I'm sorry for looking at my phone. I was just looking at the email from district council on this topic to confirm that. But yeah, that's my understanding.
Why don't we just do that?
So I'm sorry, Mr. Nakajima, just to be clear, you're saying the whole committee, or, yeah? I see some nodding heads.
I agree, because I feel like that is the least change from what we're doing today, and also with the small committee, doesn't put a burden on any one person to have to be able to do that every time. We're already reading the warrants before, we're getting them emailed to us before the meeting, so we are looking at them, we're passing them around. We'd have to, either way, we'd have to be voting on it, so let's just go that route.
Mr. Gemley, any comments or thoughts?
No, I was just going to mention the fact that part of this is being able to have enough time to deliberately go through and make sure that what you're doing is not just a perfunctory action.
Right.
And I think that, I don't know, in your experience, my experience, having them emailed beforehand covers most of that need. And so if that was part of that process that you just described, then that takes care of that.
Okay. Ms. Spitzer? Does that sound? Yeah, okay. Okay, so I will, it sounds like we've moved to a different place where we were a few minutes ago, which is great. That's why we have these discussions. So if anyone's ready to make a motion, we could have a vote tonight.
I move to amend our warrant signing process to have the full committee review and vote at each committee meeting.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Nakajima. Any further comments or discussion? All those in favor? And it is unanimous. Thank you very much. So, Dr. Morris, I assume that you will get back in touch with Sean in the business office, and then we can start this at the very next meeting in December, is that right? Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Ms. Spitzer, for bringing up the points. Again, this is not to call you out, but I think it is important to have the dissenting opinions, right, and to have these kinds of conversations, because that's how we arrive at a place where, the committee is satisfied with the outcome. Doesn't always happen like this, but it's sort of an ideal process. Okay. Next item on the agenda is policy review and possible votes, and this is for policy BDB. BDB is school committees, officers, and duties, and then policy BID, which is member compensation and expenses. And we have those policies are currently in your packet towards the end. I'm just trying to find it myself right now. Okay. So, Ms. McDonald, do you want to speak to these?
These should look familiar to all of us because the regional school committee has already looked at these and referred them to us for discussion and review. I think these are unchanged from what we looked at that committee meeting. So BDB is amended. You'll see points 8 and, I don't have my glasses, 9 are what's added, and these are to reflect requirements of the Amherst School Committee as written in the new town charter regarding the public forum that we actually just had today. So that is BDB, and then BID covers the compensation. Folks might recall that the conversation, the discussion at the full regional committee was around whether we should have a separate policy specific to the Amherst School Committee. Why did we need to amend the region document for that? I will say, if we do that approach, we'd have to also amend the region because it specifically says that no committee members receive compensation, and that would be demonstrably untrue at that point. So we would if we choose to go that route, we would need to create a new, 2 new policies as opposed to amending the one.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McDonald. Dr. Morris, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. So just a couple things that this came from the town of Amherst, and since the town charter is essentially no different from state law, these are actually in effect even before the school committee votes them. So I just want to be really clear that that's the legal advice that I've received. And in terms of member compensation and expenses, we were directed by the town to include a budget amount in last year's budget cycle for the current fiscal year, FY20. And that was the directive we received from the town, so we did so. So it was added to the budget that was voted last year. I know there's some questions and some conversation that may come up, but I just wanted to clarify those 2 pieces.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Morris. That's actually very helpful. Ms. McDonald.
I think it's important to add the comment that was made also at the regional school committee that this change in the compensation was not requested by the school committee itself. It's written into our town charter law, and so we are discussing it for that purpose only.
That's right. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, so we can talk about this. Mr. Dumley, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so on the roles of officers and duties, I do want to note that it does not say anywhere vice chair for undersecretary, as I was previously under the assumption. I think that was probably, it came up a couple times when I was secretary of the Amherst School Committee, and there were only 3 people for some reason available for part of a meeting. And so we needed a chair, so we still had a quorum. And I think that just the de facto assumption was, well, the only other person with a title chairs the meeting, so.
So you were duped into chairing a meeting, Mr. Dumley, is what that comes down to.
That's exactly what happened, yep. Roll tape. So yeah, so that's interesting. I haven't any other issue with the other changes there. As far as the compensation, that totally makes sense. And it's probably not part of this topic specifically because it doesn't affect the policy language, but I think we should definitely have an item soon about where exactly those compensation expenses should be paid out of. I mean, just because this is an open meeting, it's my personal opinion, I feel like if it's a requirement in law of our town government, it shouldn't ever be part of the school committee budget itself. I mean, the core responsibility of the elected school committee is having authority over the budget. So if there's a line item that we can't change, then it seems really counterintuitive. So I know it's only $16,000, but that has an impact. So that's my feeling of why we should have a larger discussion about that.
Yeah. And I would agree with that, Mr. Demling. I actually think I have stronger feelings perhaps even about that, because I feel that this is, I think your point about not being able to change that if it's directly impacting the school committee is a valid and legitimate point. I'm also even doubly concerned about the fact that we have, potentially what would be seen, even if it is not actually, but could be seen as a conflict of interest, by community members who might feel that if we are voting on a budget and we are drawing, salaries in effect from that budget, that could be, a problem. And I think it's a particular problem for school committee simply because we don't get to decide on the overall town budget, right? And this, the Amherst schools, elementary schools budgets are decided by the town, and so we are drawing potentially, money from that could go to other resources, and we have no sort of, oversight on the higher level budget, and so. I think that there would be enough concerns raised by community members about that. And again, as Ms. McDonald pointed out, this is not something that originated with the school committee. This is something that was written into the town charter. And I appreciate that thought that was put into the town charter. I happen to believe that, positions such as committee, and boards that represent the interests of communities are often better when they're compensated. That's just, it takes a lot of time and effort, away from family and other things to serve in this respect. At the same time, I feel, I certainly don't want to draw money from a budget that I know could potentially be negatively impacted in any year. And it feels like this is a big enough draw from that budget, especially in years where it could not, there could be some potential deficits that I wouldn't want to be a part of that. And so I think, there's different ways that the committee could handle that, but I think having it at the very least, or starting the conversation about where the money is drawn from is a critically important conversation. Mr. Nakajima, I think you had your hand up before, or did I imagine that? No.
Move to approve policy BDB, under the assumption you want the motion separate?
Yes, please. So we have a motion for approval of policy BDB. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Spitzer. We have a second. Any further discussion or questions? All those in favor of the motion to approve policy BDB? And it is unanimous. Thank you very much. In terms of Mr. Nakajima.
Move to approve policy BID.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion or comments? Mr. Nakajima?
It's why I wavered earlier, because I was planning on moving one of the policies, and then I felt like saying something. But as you know, you can't debate and then make a motion, according to Robert's Rules of Order. The way I'm viewing our motions and our votes today is that the town charter says we have to do this. It was approved by the people of the town, and we're doing it. So I'm moving this. I'm not saying, I'm essentially silent as to whether I approve of it, because we didn't ask for it. And I think, especially when you look at the budget we had, I guess not this year, but last year, it just feels brutal, right? I mean, it feels brutal. And no one would ever want to be in a position where they felt like they were having to approve some stipend and then not approve, money for our libraries or something. But here we are, and we need to be in conformance with our town charter that was overwhelmingly approved by the town.
Mr. Demling.
So, not to make this can of worms, but just reading the specific language and taking to heart Mr. Nakajima's comment. So it says Amherst School Committee members based on Amherst Town Charter approved. I think it would be a little clearer that we have no choice in this matter if it says required by the Amherst Town Charter approved December. Based on kind of sounds like, well, it's not inconsistent, we have the option. You could potentially interpret it that way if you weren't listening to this entire videotape discussion. Not that everybody doesn't watch our meetings afterwards, but And required by is actually what it is, so.
So we have a motion on, and we have a second. Are we ready to move to a vote? Mr. Demling, did you?
I move to amend the motion to approve the policy changing based on to required by.
Okay, we have an amendment to the motion, so we have to vote on that amendment first before we can vote.
A second.
Do we have a second? All those in favor of the motion as amended and presented? Okay, so we now have new language that has been put forth, which is Amherst School Committee members as required by the Amherst Town Charter, approved December 2018, and then the rest stays the same. Do we have a motion for this or further discussion or comments?
Point of order. We're actually back on the main motion, so you can just move directly to a vote, I think.
Okay. I was reiterating for the purposes of, to catch us up on where we were, because it was amended, so I just wanted to make sure. So do we have a motion for that initial?
Point of order? That's my point. You don't need a motion.
Oh,
Because you amended the main motion, which means we're now back on the main motion.
Okay.
Which means we can continue
So
to
it's-
debate it or even move to a vote.
So we don't have to actually, thank you, Mr. Nakajima, for the clarification. So we don't actually have to make another motion for that. That motion still stands. Or do we have any further discussion on this? Okay, so I will say that I actually don't know that I can vote for this, and this puts me in a really difficult spot because I will be leaving the committee, and so I don't want to feel like I am somehow blocking the potential for a salary or, stipend rather, for the committee. At the same time, I feel that I don't feel completely comfortable with having this motion representing uncertainty about where the money would be coming from. And so I have difficulty voting for something like that. So I just want to state that for the record. So if we're ready to take a vote, all those in favor of this motion as amended and put forth, please raise your hand to signify aye. We have 1 in favor, 2 in favor, 3 in favor. All those opposed? And any abstentions? 1 abstention. So we have 3 in favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstaining. Did you get that? Okay. Thank you. So Dr. Morris, I'm assuming you can bring this back to the town and get some clarity both on, further discussion, and then I think we should just think about how we want to put this on an upcoming agenda for conversation. Thank you, everyone. Okay, moving us on. Next item on the agenda is the December 2nd Town Forum. Dr. Morris.
Sure. So this is in your program that the State of the Town address is next Monday, December 2nd, a week from tonight, at the middle school auditorium. And as you can see in the program that in addition to Town Council President Griesmer and Town Manager Bockelman, there will also be a report from our own school committee chair, Anastasia Ordonez, as well as the Library Board of Trustees, and our local representative and senator will be present. And I encourage everyone to, if they're able to come to hear about not just the schools or hear a report on that, but also about the entire town's coming. And I want to appreciate the openness and the warm invitation we've received from the town to being a part of this. The town forum, again, is part of the charter that this occurs as an annual basis. So this will be sort of the precedent setter as it is on that. But I appreciate Mr. Donez's work. We were able to talk a bit about the state of the town and how that's different from what things that are typically presented at school committee meetings, because the audience is perhaps a broader audience than there is tonight. I think that's all I was planning to say about it.
Great. So I'm excited about this. I think the state of the town for the schools, it's not very different from the way that we used to present at town meeting. And Dr. Morris and I were talking about this recently, and it's an opportunity for the community to hear more about both the budgets of the schools, but also kind of what's going on in the schools, and do it in a way that outlines both our successes and our challenges. And so I think this will be a great opportunity. I have shared a draft of what I'm planning on saying with Dr. Morris. I've also shared it with our Vice Chair, Mr. Demling, just for feedback and comments. But hopefully everyone here from the committee can attend on December 2nd. It's not a requirement, but it'd be great. I wish we could offer like popcorn or something, but at the very least, we will have some pretty slides to look at. So yeah, thank you very much. If there are no questions or comments from the committee on that item, we'll move on to townwide forums on capital. And excuse me, so this is, again, coming to the committee because we have made an agreement to get some regular updates on conversations at the town level on major capital projects. We have a liaison, Mr. Nakajima. Thank you again for your service on this to help inform the committee. So I'm going to let you kick it off.
Thank you. I think the superintendent can add some commentary, color commentary, and additional information as we go. First off, hopefully all the members of the committee have already gotten an email requesting, sort of identifying when the different dates for the meetings are, as well as also trying to identify whether folks are able to attend, because they're wanting to get a count of library trustees, school committee members, as well as town councilors who are going to be attending these different public listening sessions. So just for the members, this is almost like a housekeeping issue, and I'm hoping everyone got that email. My recollection is there's also distribution of the slides and the one-pager as well. So is that right? Or actually, members of the committee could tell me, did you get it? Good, you got it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Not just double checking.
Yeah.
I mean, I know this is housekeeping, but it's really important housekeeping. So to back up, at the council level, as you all know very well, over the next year and over the next couple of years, maybe even a few years, there are going to be a number of major decisions that are made around sequencing capital projects going forward to members of the public potentially for things like debt exclusions or overrides that which would be votes by the public. That the council has spent a lot of time trying to organize its work, looking ahead where, if you hadn't heard it already, the Jones Library Board had already heard that they're going to be accepted into, they're already accepted in, but they're going to be essentially at the first stage of grant award for their library expansion and renovation project as of this coming summer, which would then start a clock for them to, for the town council to choose to fund it, not to choose to fund it, or ask for another 6-month extension. I mention that only because similar to the MSBA decision that's coming up on December 11th, there's a very real sense that the town is going to be moving from a mode of trying to figure out how to think about and juggle and plan for potential projects to actually be making decisions and sequencing decisions around very real and very live projects, which are going to require decisions by a different board. So, but also particularly by the town council and ultimately by all the members of the public. So, to kick off that process of the council trying to engage the public, and then also to ensure that as we do that, the school committee and the library board in particular are well aligned. They've decided, this is imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. They have decided to adopt the model of listening sessions that we used last spring. So, among other things, you'll be very pleased to know that if you do attend one of these sessions, and I hope you do, you not only do you not have to talk, but similar to the sessions we did last spring, you're not allowed to, which is awesome. this is really at the kind of, unlike the proposal for the SOI discussion we had last year, in this case, the information that's being presented, which was in the deck that you saw, is intended to outline what some of the major structural features, meaning the activities, as well as some of the known deficiencies of the major facilities that are under discussion for potential renovation and replacement. And then to go over what the town has done to initially prepare fiscally, but also what the fiscal challenge is that's presented that is going to require significant deliberation and planning by the town council, but is also going to require eventually some decision-making by the public at large. And then following that, there's going to be exactly what we did before. There are going to be breakout sessions with questions and facilitators. Bill Logue is doing this as well. And the goal is to do two things. One, to both inform the public very broadly about what the council is undertaking and what the basic set of information is that people are working off of, and then also to gather lots of input and questions that all of us can use and our committee can use, but in particular the council, given their preeminent role in framing and deciding this work, will guide their work, including follow-up meetings and sessions and information that they're going to have as they're trying to shape what they choose to do, but also bring the public along, engage the public for things they might choose to do in January or February or elsewhere in the year. I hope that was a good summary of it. I don't know, Dr. Morris?
Dr. Morris?
I'll just very briefly add that in addition to the flattery and imitation piece, so today I was over at Amherst Media, and instead of however long I took last year, I had 3.5 minutes to do my part, because there's also the fire, the library, DPW. But I think they're also using a similar module in terms of having a video trying to explain items with a PowerPoint overlay as well. So I think it will feel very similar to what occurred last year, although the scope is different.
That's great. So I, for one, am really just, so pleased that our town government is taking this step, and I hope that we have good turnout. And I think anything we can do to help promote it as well is critically important, right? Because we want our parents and caregivers and educators and district staff and all of us, of course, to be present as much as possible, to hear what people have to say and what their concerns are with, the timing of all of these different projects, as well as the capacity, I guess, of the community to carry these, and to really understand, what it is that they're being asked to do. So it's wonderful that they're doing this. I think this is primarily mostly just for, conversation and discussion. I was just double checking to see when our next meeting is on December 17th. So we will have actually passed, our next meeting will be after these, so we can just report back, I think, also if all of us cannot attend these meetings. But I want to thank Mr. Nakajima again for serving as liaison to the town. It's, really an important role for us, and we really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. And I guess, I don't know if there's any questions or comments from the committee for either Mr. Nakajima or Dr. Morris on this. Mr. Demling?
Yeah, thank you very much for doing this. Do you know if the town council has talked about other modes of community engagement? I mean, obviously this is the beginning of a pretty important process, not the end. And so there's different ways to engage the public, different techniques, different tactics. And it's great that we're using imitation form of flattery, public forum, and I think they'll be very good. I just didn't know, because I think it would be educational for the school committee and maybe, knock on wood, a future building committee as well. So.
I'm not able to speak for the council in terms of what they're choosing to do, but I do know that there is a communications person who's helping, who helps with community engagement. And also the strategy is to do, in terms of this work at this stage, sort of an integrated approach that involves the video being available to be pushed out, as well as a standalone. There's a connection between this work and homepage on the website, Amherst ma.gov. That will be a repository for the materials from these forums, but also will obviously allow for continued engagement from the public, but also will help to be a landing place where individuals who have figured out, hey, this is good. Like imagine if you wake up, the day after these things are done and you say, gosh, I can't believe I missed that, but this sounds really interesting. There is, in fact, going to be a page where you can go not only to see the video and get materials from it, but also learn more about the different potential projects or investments in an integrated place that also will then can drive you to websites off of that. I have also heard that counselors from different districts are going to integrate these presentations and work into the meetings that they do around town. So it's a point of departure for continued engagement, the beginning of a conversation, not the end of it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Nakajima. Okay, so I'm going to move us along. Next item on the agenda is lunch debt gifts. And again, this is another conversation that originated at the Regional School Committee regarding methods of applying donations to overdue balances overdue balances on lunch accounts, and to offer guidance to district staff for implementation. Dr. Morris, I don't know if there's anything that you want to say about this?
No, it's, well, two things. One is that since it was a different donor in a different district, we even if the result ends up being sort of similar, and I know Mr. Mangano is planning on coming back to the region with kind of hearing that feedback and putting a process in place consistent with that, we at least wanted to bring it up at the Amherst level. As students are younger, and the parental piece feels a little different with younger students as opposed to older students. The second thing is that since the article was run in the paper, we'll see if this continues, but we have gotten a couple more people interested in perhaps contributing to lunch debt, which is a great thing. So keeping on the agenda may have positive impact for students and families, just because it brings up a larger issue of food scarcity and lunch debt more generally. So that's all I have to say.
That's great news. It's great to hear our community taking those steps. Yeah. Any questions or comments for the superintendent on this item?
And if it's the same as region, then that has to be that way, but we can just, flow the same mechanism for the elementary
Mr.
schools.
Nakajima?
Keep it on the agenda. I mean, after we talk about it at the region, let's bring it back here. I think it's obviously a great thing to do, right? If we can find a vehicle or mechanism with which to support families and kids who are carrying balance and have a need. So let's move the conversation forward.
Great. Okay, thank you, Dr. Morris. Next item on the agenda is school committee calendar items. So we have our usual committee topics and calendar. Some things have already been filled in. We had a conversation tonight about some additional items for our December 17th meeting, including what I heard, in addition to the things that are already here, the discussion on MSAN, and then specific guidance for Dr. Morris for the budget guidance conversations or the strategic program reviews. Any other items or issues, either for the December meeting or future meetings, that strike the committee? Ms. McDonald.
I think that probably at the January 21st meeting would be an appropriate time to have the sixth grade, sort of another update on that. The December 17th, I don't think, I forget when our next meeting is on that one, but it's like either the day before or right around then, so it wouldn't be really appropriate. But the January would be an appropriate time for that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other topics for upcoming meetings? Okay. Dr. Morris, do you want to run through real quick what you've got for the December 17th meeting, please?
Sure. So what I have is MSBA Statement of Interest Update and Discussion, Budget Guided Strategic Program Reviews, Fee Review, Early Childhood Report, which will be looped into the budget guidance piece, Dual Language Enrollment Discussion, something that we said we'd come back to. I've got MSAN, I've got school committee salaries and funding source as well, and unless I'm missing one, that's what I've got.
That's what I have. Okay. Great. And as usual, if any other items come up that committee members want to hear about, please feel free to send them along, either to me or Dr. Morris, and we will make sure these get added on here. Okay, so last item on the agenda is accept gifts, and we do have some gifts. Who would like to read them? Ms. McDonald.
Spoke first. I move to accept the following gifts from James Kwok and Sylvia Brandt from Vanguard number 715984 to support Crocker Farm at the principal discretion in the amount of $4,300. SEI Bar Wakefield Inc., number 1004 and 1005, to support books for Wildwood ELL students on behalf of Ju Jia Liu in the total amount of $5,000. From ARPS PGO number 995003 to support the Wildwood at principal discretion in the amount of $744. And from Eric Nakajima to support 3 copies of the book They Called Us Enemy by George Takei, estimated value of $35, for a total value of $10,044.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Demling. Any further comments? Mr. Demling.
Mr. Nakajima, what was you described us at the region. Could you remind us again what They Called Us Enemy is about?
Yeah, so first off, the inspiration for the gifts to the region and the elementary schools came from a conversation with Marta Guevara, in which she was describing to me that there used to be more of a discussion or introduction to the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II in the younger grades, and that currently that's not the case. It's in older grades, and but also just an interest in general materials about it. And as it is, George Takei, who's a noted activist and actor, and I guess social media comedian, had co-written a book about his experience about being interned, and drew direct connections between that experience and what's currently happening to immigrants and others in our country. And so after the gift to the region, I'd said to Dr. Morris that if the book, it wasn't clear to me what the age span that was appropriate for the book. If it was something that was appropriate for older grades in the elementary school, then I'd be happy to make a donation there as well. And if not, then not. And then Dr. Morris took it from there, and here I am.
Dr. Morris.
On that note, I want to publicly thank Susan Wells, the librarian at Wildwood, for taking her own time to take a look at the book and doing a thorough read-through and thinking about both reading level, but also the reading level, because of the nature of the book, is not actually hard to decipher, but it's the content level, developmentally, and what's appropriate. So I want to thank her for doing a deep dive into that and coming up with a conclusion that I think we can support our elementary schools to have engaging high-quality literature and a topic that couldn't be more pressing.
That's great. All those in favor of accepting the gifts? And it is unanimous. Thank you very much. Unless folks want to hang out here for a lot longer, I will also take out another motion.
And move to adjourn?
Thank you, Ms. Spitzer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Nakajima. All those in favor of adjourning? And we are adjourned.